The security camera footage from the Millennium Park Farmers Market in Chicago would haunt Daniel Walker for the rest of his life, not because of its poor quality or mundane subject matter, but because it captured the impossible. His dead wife, Annika, walking hand in hand with his stepfather, Richard, through the Saturday morning crowd, laughing at something he had whispered in her ear. Daniel had been standing 20 feet away, frozen in disbelief, as he watched the woman he had mourned for 6 years, the woman whose funeral he had attended, whose death certificate hung framed in his bedroom as a memorial to their lost love purchasing organic vegetables with the man who had comforted him through his darkest hours of grief. The moment shattered Daniel's understanding of reality so completely that he initially questioned his own sanity, wondering if the emotional trauma of losing Annika had finally manifested in hallucinations that his rational mind could no longer distinguish from actual experience. The woman bore every detail of his wife's appearance: the distinctive scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the graceful way she moved her hands when speaking, the specific shade of auburn that she had always claimed was her natural hair color, despite Daniel's playful accusations that it came from expensive salon treatments. But this couldn't be Annika, because Annika had died in a hospital in Mumbai during what was supposed to be a routine visit to her ailing mother, victim of a sudden illness that had taken her life before Daniel could arrange emergency travel to India. The death had devastated Daniel's world 6 years earlier, transforming him from a confident small business owner with a thriving auto repair shop and a loving marriage into a broken man who struggled daily with survivor's guilt and the crushing loneliness that followed the loss of someone who had been both spouse and best friend. Annika's death had occurred during a period when their marriage was stronger than ever, making her loss particularly cruel and incomprehensible. They had been planning to start a family, discussing names for children who would never be born, and dreaming about renovating the house they had purchased together in Lincoln Park. The elaborate grief process that had consumed Daniel for years included not only personal mourning but also complex international legal procedures to repatriate Annika's remains, settle her affairs in India, and manage the insurance policies and financial arrangements that had provided him with resources to rebuild his life while honoring her memory. Richard Walker, his stepfather since age 12, had been his primary source of emotional support throughout the ordeal, helping him navigate the bureaucratic complexities of international death documentation while providing the steady masculine presence that Daniel had relied on since his biological father's abandonment during his childhood. Richard's support had extended far beyond emotional comfort to include practical assistance with Daniel's business during the months when grief had made him unable to focus on work, temporary financial support when insurance settlements were delayed, and gentle encouragement to eventually pursue new relationships when Daniel's isolation became concerning to family and friends. The older man's military background and experience with loss had made him uniquely qualified to guide Daniel through the stages of grief, while maintaining hope for eventual recovery and renewed happiness. The remarriage that Richard had encouraged 3 years after Annika's death had brought Sarah Peterson into Daniel's life, a kind and patient elementary school teacher who understood that she would always be compared to the memory of his first wife, but who loved him enough to accept that reality while building their own authentic relationship. Sarah's presence had gradually restored joy to Daniel's daily existence, though he maintained certain rituals and memorial practices that honored Annika's memory, while embracing his new life with appropriate gratitude and commitment. The Saturday morning visit to the farmers market had been a routine weekend activity for Daniel and Sarah, part of their shared commitment to healthy living and community engagement that reflected their hopes for starting a family together. Daniel's decision to attend alone that particular morning was motivated by Sarah's mild illness, rather than any desire for solitary reflection, making his encounter with what appeared to be his deceased wife's living form particularly jarring and inexplicable. The initial shock of seeing Annika alive was compounded by her apparent intimacy with Richard, whose body language and protective gestures suggested a relationship that extended far beyond casual friendship or coincidental encounter. Their interaction displayed the comfortable familiarity of long-term romantic partners, complete with inside jokes, synchronized movements, and the unconscious physical intimacy that develops between people who share daily life experiences and private emotional connections. Daniel's paralysis during those crucial moments prevented him from approaching them directly or documenting their presence with his phone camera, leaving him with only his traumatized memory as evidence of an encounter that challenged everything he believed about his personal history and the people he trusted most. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating, creating cognitive dissonance that made rational thought nearly impossible, while flooding his system with adrenaline and confusion that would persist for days afterward. The drive home from the farmer's market occurred in a dissociative state where Daniel's conscious mind struggled to process what he had witnessed, while his subconscious began connecting details and inconsistencies that had never previously seemed significant. The perfect timing of Anika's death during a period when their marriage was strongest, Richard's surprisingly detailed knowledge of Indian bureaucratic procedures, the unusual delays in receiving official documentation, and the substantial insurance settlements that had ultimately benefited Daniel financially, all of these factors began forming a pattern that suggested deliberate orchestration rather than tragic coincidence. The transformation of Daniel Walker from grieving widower to criminal investigation catalyst began with 48 hours of obsessive research into his wife's death that revealed inconsistencies and gaps in the official narrative that he had previously accepted without question. The death certificate from Mumbai that had served as the foundation for insurance claims, legal proceedings, and his own grieving process contained subtle irregularities in formatting and authentication that became apparent only when Daniel compared it to legitimate Indian government documents he found online through consular websites, official Indian medical databases. The hospital where Anika had allegedly died showed no record of her admission or treatment when Daniel contacted them directly through international phone calls that cost him hundreds of dollars but provided crucial information about the fiction that had been constructed around her supposed final illness. The medical facility's administrative staff, initially confused by his inquiries about a patient from 6 years earlier, eventually confirmed that no one matching Anika's description or documentation had been treated at their institution during the time frame specified in the death certificate that Richard had helped him obtain through supposedly official channels. Daniel's investigation expanded to include examination of the financial transactions that had occurred around the time of Anika's alleged death, revealing patterns of international money transfers and account activity that seemed inconsistent with someone who was supposedly dying in a Mumbai hospital. The bank records that Daniel had never previously scrutinized showed substantial withdrawals from their joint accounts during the weeks before her reported death, transfers to institutions and individuals that Anika had never mentioned during their daily phone conversations from India. The realization that his wife's death had been an elaborate fiction forced Daniel to confront the possibility that Richard, the man who had been his primary source of comfort and guidance during the darkest period of his life, had been instrumental in orchestrating a deception that had destroyed his emotional well-being while potentially providing financial benefits to unknown parties. The psychological impact of this recognition was compounded by the need to maintain normal behavior around Richard until Daniel could gather sufficient evidence to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. Emily Walker, Daniel's younger sister who worked as a paralegal in downtown Chicago, became his first confidant as he struggled to process the implications of his discovery while determining appropriate courses of action. Emily's legal training and natural skepticism made her an ideal ally for evaluating evidence and developing investigation strategies, though she initially shared Daniel's difficulty in accepting that Richard could be capable of such elaborate and cruel deception. The decision to hire private investigator Marcus Green reflected Daniel's recognition that his emotional investment in the case made objective investigation impossible, while the complexity of international fraud required professional expertise that extended beyond his capabilities as a small business owner. Green's background in financial fraud investigation and his connections within law enforcement provided access to resources and databases that would be essential for unraveling the conspiracy that had destroyed Daniel's life. The first week of professional investigation revealed that Anika's disappearance coincided with unusual activity in multiple financial accounts that Richard had access to through his role as Daniel's informal financial advisor during the grief period, suggesting that the emotional manipulation had been combined with systematic theft that had gone undetected due to Daniel's inability to focus on practical matters during his mourning. The financial damage was substantial, but secondary to the emotional trauma of recognizing that his stepfather had exploited his trust to facilitate crimes that had caused immeasurable psychological suffering. Detective Green's connections within the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit provided access to investigative resources and legal procedures that would be necessary for building a criminal case against Richard, potentially locating Anika to determine her role in the conspiracy. The complexity of the case, involving international fraud, identity theft, and insurance fraud, required coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies and careful documentation of evidence that could withstand legal scrutiny. The surveillance of Richard's activities that Green initiated revealed behavioral patterns and associations that provided additional evidence of ongoing criminal activity, while also confirming Daniel's suspicions about his stepfather's relationship with Anika. The detailed documentation of their interactions, combined with financial records and travel documentation, created a comprehensive picture of a conspiracy that had been operating for years, while maintaining perfect secrecy through careful planning and exploitation of Daniel's emotional vulnerability. The psychological counseling that Daniel began during this period was essential for maintaining his mental health, while processing the traumatic revelation that his wife's death had been fabricated and that his trusted stepfather had been systematically exploiting him for years. The therapeutic process helped him understand that his previous inability to detect the deception reflected the sophistication of the manipulation rather than any failing on his part, while also providing strategies for managing the anger and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm his ability to function normally. Call to Action. Diese unglaubliche Geschichte von Betrug und Manipulation innerhalb der eigenen Familie zeigt, wie weit Menschen gehen können, ihre Opfer zu täuschen. Wenn Sie mehr über solche schockierenden Fälle erfahren möchten und lernen wollen, wie man sich vor derartigen Machenschaften schützt, abonnieren Sie unseren Kanal und aktivieren Sie die Benachrichtigungen, denn die Wahrheit ist oft erschreckender als jede Fiction. The systematic investigation into Richard Walker's financial activities revealed a complex web of fraudulent schemes that extended far beyond the fabrication of Anika's death, encompassing identity theft, insurance fraud, and embezzlement that had generated hundreds of thousands of dollars over a 6-year period while exploiting Daniel's grief and trust. Detective Green's analysis of banking records, credit reports, and financial transactions uncovered evidence that Richard had been using his stepson's personal information and emotional vulnerability to facilitate crimes that demonstrated both sophisticated planning and complete disregard for Daniel's psychological welfare. The insurance policies that had provided Daniel with what he believed was compensation for his wife's tragic death were revealed to be the centerpiece of an elaborate fraud scheme that involved forged medical documents, bribed officials in India, and a network of accomplices who had created false documentation to support Anika's supposed death. The investigation revealed that Richard had been the primary beneficiary of these policies through complex legal arrangements that had diverted substantial portions of the settlements into accounts under his control, making Daniel an unwitting participant in his own financial exploitation. The international scope of the fraud required cooperation with Indian authorities and Interpol resources to investigate the false documentation that had been created to support Anika's alleged death, revealing a criminal network that specialized in creating fraudulent death certificates and medical records for clients willing to pay substantial fees for the service. The sophistication of this network and the quality of their forged documents explained why Daniel's grief-stricken acceptance of the official narrative had seemed reasonable at the time, as the documentation had been designed to fool even careful scrutiny. Anika's role in the conspiracy emerged gradually through investigation of her activities during the months before her supposed death, revealing that she had been in communication with Richard for years, and that their affair had begun while she was still married to Daniel. The timeline of their relationship suggested that the decision to fake her death had been motivated by both romantic involvement and financial opportunity, as Anika's disappearance allowed her to start a new life with Richard, while Daniel remained unaware of their betrayal. The psychological profile of the conspiracy revealed that Richard's manipulation of Daniel extended beyond simple financial fraud to include deliberate psychological abuse designed to maintain his stepson's dependence and prevent him from developing the emotional stability that might have led him to discover the deception. Richard's role as Daniel's primary support system during his grief had been calculated to maximize his control, while creating opportunities for continued exploitation that could potentially last for years. The travel records that Detective Green obtained through law enforcement channels revealed that both Richard and Anika had been making regular trips between the United States and various international destinations where they could meet without detection, using false identities and carefully planned itineraries that avoided any possibility of accidental discovery by Daniel or other family members. The cost and complexity of maintaining these secret travels indicated that their criminal activities had been highly profitable, while also demonstrating their commitment to maintaining the deception indefinitely. Emily Walker's investigation into Richard's background revealed a history of financial fraud and manipulation that predated his relationship with Daniel's family, including previous schemes that had targeted vulnerable individuals and families through exploitation of emotional crises and personal tragedies. This pattern of behavior suggested that Richard's relationship with Daniel's mother had itself been motivated by criminal opportunity rather than genuine affection, making Daniel a target from childhood rather than simply a victim of circumstance. The legal complexities of prosecuting Richard and Anika required careful coordination between multiple jurisdictions and law enforcement agencies, as their crimes involved activities in several countries and violated numerous federal and state laws related to fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. The prosecutor assigned to the case emphasized that successful prosecution would require detailed documentation of financial damages, comprehensive evidence of the conspiracy, and testimony from victims who could establish the emotional and psychological harm caused by the defendant's actions. The impact on Daniel's current marriage became a significant concern as the investigation progressed, as Sarah's trust and emotional well-being were threatened by the revelation that Daniel's previous marriage had been based on deceptions that continued to affect their current relationship. The couple's therapy sessions focused on maintaining their relationship while processing the traumatic revelations about Daniel's past and developing strategies for moving forward together, despite the uncertainty created by the ongoing investigation. The surveillance evidence that Detective Green gathered provided visual confirmation of Richard and Anika's ongoing relationship, while also documenting their continued criminal activities, including meetings with other individuals who appeared to be involved in their fraudulent schemes. The systematic documentation of their behavior created a comprehensive record that would be essential for prosecution, while also providing Daniel with irrefutable proof that his suspicions were justified and that his stepfather's betrayal was even more extensive than he had initially feared. The financial recovery process began with efforts to trace and freeze assets that had been obtained through fraudulent means. Though the international nature of the conspiracy and the time that had elapsed since the original crimes made complete recovery unlikely, the legal team emphasized that the primary goal was criminal prosecution and emotional closure rather than financial compensation, though any recovered assets would be returned to Daniel as the primary victim of the conspiracy. The confrontation between Daniel and Richard Walker took place in Richard's suburban Chicago home on a frigid January evening, orchestrated by Detective Green and law enforcement officials who had gathered sufficient evidence to support criminal charges while also providing Daniel with the closure he needed to move forward with his life. The meeting was secretly recorded through equipment provided by the police department, ensuring that any admissions or threats made by Richard would be preserved as evidence for the upcoming criminal proceedings. Richard's initial response to Daniel's accusations demonstrated the psychological manipulation skills that had enabled him to maintain his deception for 6 years, as he attempted to gaslight his stepson by suggesting that grief and stress had caused him to develop paranoid delusions about people who loved and supported him. His performance was masterfully calculated to exploit Daniel's remaining emotional vulnerability while maintaining plausible deniability about his criminal activities, though his defensive reactions gradually revealed knowledge of details that he shouldn't have possessed if his claims of innocence were truthful. The systematic presentation of evidence that Detective Green had prepared forced Richard to abandon his initial denials and attempt more sophisticated explanations that revealed the depth of his planning, while also confirming his central role in orchestrating Anika's fake death. His admissions, captured on recording equipment, provided crucial evidence for prosecution, while also giving Daniel definitive proof that his suspicions were justified and that his stepfather's betrayal had been deliberate and calculated rather than the result of circumstances or Misunderstandings. Anika's presence during the final portion of the confrontation was arranged through careful coordination between law enforcement and immigration authorities, as her illegal re-entry into the United States provided leverage for securing her cooperation with the investigation, while also allowing Daniel to confront the woman whose supposed death had defined his adult life. Her appearance, while emotionally devastating for Daniel, was necessary for complete resolution of the case and provided crucial testimony about the conspiracy's origins and implementation. The emotional impact of seeing Anika alive and healthy while listening to her explain her motivations for destroying his life was almost unbearable for Daniel, as he struggled to reconcile the woman he had loved and mourned with the calculating criminal who described their marriage as an inconvenience that had been eliminated through carefully planned deception. Her lack of remorse and her focus on justifying her actions rather than acknowledging their impact on Daniel revealed personality traits that he had never recognized during their marriage, but that explained her ability to maintain such elaborate deceptions. The revelation that Anika's relationship with Richard had begun during the early years of her marriage to Daniel forced him to reconsider every memory of their life together, while questioning his ability to recognize authenticity in personal relationships. The timeline of their affair suggested that virtually every important moment in Daniel's marriage had been tainted by betrayal and deception, making it impossible for him to maintain any positive memories of the relationship that had once been the foundation of his adult identity. Richard's explanation of his motivations revealed a complex mixture of financial greed, psychological control, and personal resentment that had driven him to destroy his stepson's life while maintaining the facade of loving support and family loyalty. His military background had provided him with planning skills and access to resources that facilitated the conspiracy, while his position as Daniel's trusted father figure had given him intimate knowledge of his victim's vulnerabilities and blind spots. The legal proceedings that followed the confrontation moved swiftly through the criminal justice system, as the comprehensive evidence gathered by Detective Green and the admissions obtained during the recorded confrontation provided prosecutors with overwhelming proof of the defendant's guilt. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, insurance fraud, identity theft, and emotional abuse, carrying potential sentences that reflected the serious nature of crimes that had caused immeasurable psychological damage while generating substantial financial losses. The media attention that the case attracted highlighted the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy, while also raising awareness about the vulnerability of grieving individuals to exploitation by people they trust. The story's unique elements, including the international fraud network and the psychological manipulation of family relationships, made it a compelling example of how modern criminals could exploit both technology and traditional trust relationships to commit crimes that were previously impossible. Daniel's testimony during the trial proceedings required him to relive the most painful period of his life, while also demonstrating the ongoing psychological damage caused by the defendant's actions, providing the court with crucial evidence about the human cost of sophisticated fraud schemes. His courage in facing his abusers publicly, while maintaining his composure during cross-examination, demonstrated remarkable strength and contributed to successful prosecution of individuals whose crimes might otherwise have remained undetected. The psychological evaluation of both defendants revealed personality disorders and antisocial traits that explained their ability to maintain such elaborate deceptions while causing severe harm to someone who had trusted them completely. The expert testimony about their mental health provided context for their criminal behavior, while also supporting the prosecution's argument that they posed ongoing threats to society and deserved substantial prison sentences. The trial of Richard Walker and Anika Sharma became a landmark case in the prosecution of international fraud conspiracies, attracting attention from legal professionals, law enforcement agencies, and victims' rights advocates who recognized the sophisticated nature of the crimes and their implications for protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation by trusted family members and intimate partners. The prosecution's case was built around the comprehensive evidence gathered by Detective Green and the emotional testimony of victims who had suffered devastating psychological damage while being systematically robbed of their financial resources and personal autonomy. The defense strategy employed by Richard's legal team attempted to minimize his role in the conspiracy while portraying him as a victim of Anika's manipulation, arguing that his genuine affection for his stepson had been exploited by a sophisticated criminal who had seduced him into participating in schemes he didn't fully understand. This approach required the defense to acknowledge the existence of the conspiracy while attempting to shift primary responsibility to Anika, though the evidence of Richard's planning and leadership role made this strategy largely ineffective. Anika's defense focused on claims of domestic abuse and emotional coercion, arguing that her participation in the conspiracy had been motivated by fear of Richard's controlling behavior rather than personal greed or malice toward Daniel. Her testimony about Richard's allegedly threatening behavior was designed to generate sympathy while explaining her criminal actions as survival responses rather than calculated crimes, though the timeline of their relationship and the evidence of her active participation in planning undermined these claims. The international investigation that supported the prosecution revealed connections between the defendants and criminal networks operating across multiple countries, demonstrating that their fraud against Daniel was part of a larger industry that specialized in exploiting personal relationships and family bonds to commit financial crimes. The scope of these criminal enterprises highlighted the need for enhanced international cooperation in combating fraud, while also demonstrating the vulnerability of individuals who trusted family members and romantic partners without adequate verification. Daniel's impact statement during the sentencing phase provided the court with a comprehensive account of the psychological damage caused by the defendant's actions, including years of unnecessary grief, the destruction of his ability to trust others, and the ongoing trauma associated with discovering that his most intimate relationships had been based on lies and exploitation. His testimony emphasized that the financial losses, while substantial, were secondary to the emotional devastation that would require years of therapy and support to address. The sentences imposed on both defendants reflected the serious nature of their crimes and the extensive planning that had been required to maintain their deception for 6 years while causing ongoing harm to their primary victim. Richard received 25 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering, while Anika received 18 years for her role in the conspiracy and her cooperation with the investigation of the international criminal network that had facilitated their crimes. The civil litigation that followed the criminal proceedings focused on recovering assets that had been obtained through fraudulent means, while also establishing legal precedents for holding criminals accountable for the psychological damage caused by elaborate deception schemes. The complexity of tracing international financial transfers and recovering assets that had been laundered through multiple accounts made complete financial recovery impossible, though Daniel was able to recover substantial portions of the insurance settlements that had been diverted by Richard. The insurance investigation that accompanied the criminal proceedings revealed systematic flaws in the verification procedures used by companies to confirm death claims from international locations, leading to enhanced security measures and improved cooperation with foreign governments to prevent similar fraud in the future. The changes implemented by the insurance industry in response to Daniel's case would protect future victims while also making it more difficult for criminals to exploit international bureaucratic differences. The psychological treatment that Daniel underwent during and after the trial focused on rebuilding his ability to trust others while processing the trauma associated with discovering that his core relationships had been based on deception and exploitation. The therapeutic process required him to re-examine his entire adult life while developing new frameworks for evaluating authenticity in personal relationships, a process that was both painful and essential for his long-term recovery. Emily Walker's role in supporting her brother throughout the investigation and trial demonstrated the crucial importance of family support for victims of sophisticated fraud, while her legal expertise contributed to the successful prosecution of individuals whose crimes might otherwise have been too complex for traditional law enforcement approaches. Her advocacy for enhanced protection of fraud victims led to her involvement in legislative efforts to strengthen legal remedies for individuals who had been exploited by family members and romantic partners. The relationship between Daniel and Sarah survived the traumatic revelations in legal proceedings, though both partners required extensive counseling to address the impact of the conspiracy on their trust and communication. Their ability to maintain their marriage while processing the reality that Daniel's previous relationship had been entirely fabricated provided a model for other couples facing similar challenges while demonstrating that authentic love could survive even the most devastating deceptions. The aftermath of the trial brought mixed relief and continuing trauma for Daniel Walker, as the legal validation of his victimization provided closure regarding the conspiracy, while also forcing him to confront the reality that 6 years of his life had been defined by elaborate lies that had shaped every major decision he had made during that period. The psychological process of rebuilding his identity without the foundational narrative of tragic loss and recovery required extensive therapeutic intervention and the support of family and friends who understood that his healing would be a long-term process rather than an immediate result of justice being served. The investigation of the international criminal network that had facilitated Richard and Anika's fraud revealed connections to dozens of similar cases across multiple countries, leading to enhanced cooperation between law enforcement agencies and the development of specialized units focused on combating sophisticated fraud schemes that exploited personal relationships and family bonds. The techniques used against Daniel were identified as part of a broader criminal industry that generated millions of dollars annually while causing immeasurable psychological damage to victims who trusted family members and romantic partners. Detective Green's continued work on related cases led to the identification and prosecution of additional criminals who had used similar methods to exploit vulnerable individuals, demonstrating that Daniel's case was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a systematic approach to financial crime that required coordinated law enforcement responses and enhanced public awareness to prevent future victimization. The database of fraud techniques and victim profiles developed through these investigations became a valuable resource for protecting potential victims and identifying criminal activities before they could cause extensive damage. The civil lawsuit against the insurance companies that had paid claims based on fraudulent documentation resulted in substantial settlements that provided Daniel with financial compensation, while also establishing legal precedents for corporate responsibility in verifying international death claims. The enhanced verification procedures implemented by insurance companies in response to the lawsuit would protect future victims, while also making it more difficult for criminals to exploit bureaucratic differences between countries to commit fraud. The media coverage of Daniel's case brought national attention to the vulnerability of grieving individuals to exploitation by trusted family members and romantic partners, leading to enhanced public awareness about sophisticated fraud schemes, while also providing education about warning signs that potential victims could recognize. The story's unique elements and the comprehensive nature of the conspiracy made it a compelling case study for law enforcement training programs and victim advocacy organizations. Daniel's decision to speak publicly about his experience, despite the personal embarrassment and emotional difficulty involved, demonstrated remarkable courage while also providing other victims with validation and support for reporting similar crimes. His advocacy work with victims' rights organizations and law enforcement agencies contributed to enhanced protection for vulnerable individuals, while also helping develop more effective investigation techniques for complex fraud cases. The financial recovery process extended over several years, as investigators worked to trace and recover assets that had been obtained through fraudulent means, with the complexity of international money laundering making complete recovery impossible, despite the best efforts of law enforcement and legal professionals. The recovered funds provided Daniel with some compensation for his losses, while also demonstrating that sophisticated fraud investigations could achieve meaningful results even in cases involving complex international criminal networks. The therapeutic process that Daniel underwent to address the psychological trauma caused by the conspiracy required him to develop entirely new frameworks for understanding trust, family relationships, and personal identity, while also processing the grief associated with losing relationships that he had believed were authentic. The long-term nature of this recovery process reflected the sophisticated nature of the psychological manipulation he had experienced and the fundamental way that the conspiracy had altered his understanding of reality. Sarah's continued support throughout the investigation and recovery process demonstrated the strength of their relationship, while also highlighting the challenges faced by family members of fraud victims who must navigate their own emotional responses, while providing support to someone whose reality has been fundamentally altered by criminal deception. Her patience and understanding contributed significantly to Daniel's recovery, while also providing a model for other partners facing similar challenges. The legislative changes prompted by Daniel's case included enhanced penalties for fraud crimes involving family relationships and romantic partnerships, recognition of psychological abuse as a component of financial crimes, and improved resources for victims who needed support navigating complex legal and financial recovery processes. These changes reflected growing understanding of the sophisticated nature of modern fraud, while also acknowledging the particular vulnerability of individuals who trust family members and intimate partners. The ongoing impact of the case extended beyond individual justice to include systematic improvements in fraud prevention, victim support, and international law enforcement cooperation that would protect future victims, while also making it more difficult for criminals to exploit personal relationships for financial gain. Daniel's willingness to pursue justice despite the personal cost contributed to these broader improvements, while also demonstrating that individual victims could achieve meaningful change through courage and persistence. The psychological reconstruction of Daniel's life required him to re-examine every memory from his marriage to Anika through the lens of her systematic deception, a process that was both necessary for his recovery and devastating in its implications for his understanding of authentic love and genuine human connection. The therapeutic work involved not only processing the trauma of discovering the conspiracy, but also developing new skills for evaluating trustworthiness and authenticity in relationships, while maintaining the capacity for emotional intimacy that had been damaged by years of manipulation and betrayal. The international manhunt for other members of the criminal network that had facilitated Anika's fake death led to arrests and prosecutions across 3 countries, revealing the sophisticated infrastructure required to maintain elaborate fraud schemes involving false documentation, bribed officials, and complex financial transactions. The cooperation between law enforcement agencies demonstrated the potential for effective international crime fighting, while also highlighting the challenges posed by criminals who exploited jurisdictional boundaries and cultural differences to avoid prosecution. Emily Walker's legal career was significantly impacted by her involvement in her brother's case, leading to specialization in fraud, prosecution, and victim advocacy that made her a recognized expert in crimes involving family exploitation and financial manipulation. Her work with other victims provided crucial support for individuals navigating complex legal systems, while also contributing to the development of more effective prosecution techniques for sophisticated fraud cases that required understanding of both criminal methods and psychological manipulation. The insurance industry's response to the revelation of systematic fraud in international death claims led to comprehensive reforms in verification procedures and enhanced cooperation with foreign governments to prevent similar crimes in the future. The changes implemented in response to Daniel's case included mandatory independent verification of death certificates from high-risk countries, enhanced background checks for beneficiaries, and improved communication with law enforcement agencies investigating potential fraud. Detective Green's expertise in international fraud investigation made him a sought-after consultant for law enforcement agencies and private investigators working on similar cases, while his innovative techniques for tracing complex financial transactions and identifying criminal networks became standard procedures for investigating sophisticated fraud schemes. His continued work on related cases led to the development of enhanced training programs for investigators, specializing in financial crimes involving personal relationships and family bonds. The documentary film produced about Daniel's case brought widespread public attention to the sophistication of modern fraud, while also providing education about warning signs that potential victims could recognize to protect themselves from similar exploitation. The film's impact extended beyond entertainment to include practical crime prevention benefits, while also validating the experiences of other fraud victims who had previously felt isolated and ashamed about their victimization. Daniel's relationship with Sarah continued to strengthen as they worked together to process the trauma of the conspiracy, while building authentic trust based on complete honesty and transparency about their individual backgrounds and family histories. Their success in maintaining their marriage, despite the devastating revelations about Daniel's past, provided hope for other couples facing similar challenges, while also demonstrating that genuine love could survive even the most sophisticated deceptions. The Financial Crimes Unit that was established in response to Daniel's case and similar investigations focused specifically on fraud schemes involving family relationships and romantic partnerships, providing specialized expertise for investigating crimes that required understanding of both criminal techniques and psychological manipulation. The unit's success in identifying and prosecuting sophisticated fraud networks demonstrated the value of specialized approaches to complex financial crimes, while also providing better support for victims navigating difficult legal processes. The victim support services that were enhanced in response to Daniel's case included specialized counseling for individuals who had been exploited by family members and romantic partners, legal assistance for navigating complex recovery processes, and advocacy support for victims testifying in criminal proceedings. These services filled important gaps in victim support while also providing resources that helped other fraud victims achieve justice and recovery. The academic research prompted by Daniel's case contributed to enhanced understanding of the psychological techniques used by sophisticated fraudsters, while also advancing knowledge about the long-term impact of elaborate deception on victims' mental health and ability to form trusting relationships. The interdisciplinary research involving criminology, psychology, and sociology provided valuable insights for both crime prevention and victim treatment, while also informing public policy responses to sophisticated fraud. The international cooperation agreements that were negotiated in response to Daniel's case and similar investigations created frameworks for more effective prosecution of transnational fraud, while also improving protection for citizens traveling or conducting business in foreign countries. These agreements demonstrated that international crime fighting could be effective when governments committed to meaningful cooperation, while also acknowledging the shared responsibility for protecting vulnerable individuals from sophisticated criminal exploitation. The establishment of the Daniel Walker Foundation 3 years after the trial represented his transformation from victim to advocate, creating a permanent institution dedicated to supporting other individuals who had been exploited by trusted family members and romantic partners, while also funding research into sophisticated fraud prevention and victim recovery techniques. The foundation's work included direct support for victims navigating complex legal and financial recovery processes, educational programs for potential victims, and advocacy for legislative changes that would enhance protection for vulnerable individuals. The International Conference on Family Fraud that the foundation sponsored brought together law enforcement officials, researchers, victim advocates, and survivors from around the world to share knowledge about sophisticated criminal techniques while also developing more effective prevention and prosecution strategies. The conference proceedings contributed to enhanced cooperation between agencies while also providing victims with validation and support for their recovery efforts. Sarah and Daniel's decision to start a family despite the trauma they had experienced demonstrated their commitment to building a future based on authentic love and trust, rather than allowing the conspiracy to define their relationship permanently. Their son's birth represented hope and renewal, while also providing Daniel with new motivation for his advocacy work and his commitment to creating a safer world for vulnerable individuals. The legislative package that Emily Walker helped draft in response to her brother's case included enhanced penalties for fraud crimes involving family relationships, mandatory training for law enforcement officers investigating financial crimes, and improved resources for victims seeking justice and recovery. The legislation's passage in multiple states created important precedents for protecting vulnerable individuals, while also demonstrating that individual victims could achieve systemic change through persistent advocacy. The training program that Detective Green developed for law enforcement agencies included specialized techniques for investigating complex fraud cases, while also providing education about the psychological aspects of victim exploitation and the importance of trauma-informed investigation methods. The program's adoption by agencies across the country improved the quality of fraud investigations, while also providing better support for victims participating in criminal proceedings. The corporate fraud prevention industry that emerged in response to Daniel's case and similar investigations created new opportunities for protecting potential victims, while also making it more difficult for criminals to exploit personal relationships for financial gain. The specialized services included background verification for romantic partners, family financial security consulting, and crisis intervention for individuals who suspected they were being exploited by trusted family members or intimate partners. The psychological research that Daniel participated in contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of elaborate deception on victims' mental health, while also advancing knowledge about effective treatment approaches for individuals recovering from systematic manipulation and betrayal. His willingness to share his experience for research purposes provided valuable data for developing better therapeutic interventions, while also contributing to prevention efforts. The international law enforcement database that was created to track sophisticated fraud schemes included information about criminal techniques, victim profiles, and prosecution strategies that helped agencies identify and investigate similar crimes more effectively. The database's success in facilitating cooperation between agencies demonstrated the value of information sharing, while also providing real-time alerts about emerging criminal trends and techniques. The victim advocacy network that grew out of Daniel's case provided ongoing support for individuals recovering from family fraud, while also maintaining political pressure for continued improvements in prevention and prosecution. The network's work included direct support for victims, legislative advocacy, and public education campaigns that raised awareness about sophisticated fraud while reducing the stigma associated with victimization by trusted family members. The documentary series that followed up on Daniel's case tracked the long-term impact of the conspiracy on all involved parties, while also examining the broader implications for society's understanding of trust, family relationships, and vulnerability to exploitation. The series' educational value extended beyond entertainment to include practical crime prevention benefits, while also providing ongoing validation for other victims of similar crimes. The insurance industry's continued evolution in response to fraud cases, like Daniel's, included enhanced technology for verifying international documentation, improved cooperation with law enforcement agencies, and more sophisticated risk assessment techniques that could identify potential fraud before claims were paid. These improvements protected both insurance companies and legitimate claimants, while also making it more difficult for criminals to exploit the system. The 10-year anniversary of the conspiracy's exposure marked a significant milestone in Daniel Walker's journey from victim to advocate, as he reflected on the personal transformation that had occurred through his pursuit of justice, while also recognizing the broader impact that his case had achieved in protecting other vulnerable individuals from similar exploitation. The anniversary provided an opportunity to assess the long-term consequences of the conspiracy, while also celebrating the positive changes that had emerged from tragedy and betrayal. The Daniel Walker Foundation had grown into a nationally recognized organization that provided direct support to hundreds of fraud victims, while also funding research and advocacy efforts that contributed to systematic improvements in prevention and prosecution. The Foundation's annual conference brought together survivors, researchers, law enforcement officials, and policymakers to share knowledge and coordinate efforts to combat sophisticated fraud schemes that exploited personal relationships and family bonds. Daniel's marriage to Sarah had not only survived the traumatic revelations about his past, but had become stronger through their shared commitment to honesty, transparency, and mutual support in facing difficult challenges. Their 2 children, now 7 and 5 years old, represented hope and renewal, while also providing Daniel with motivation to continue his advocacy work and his commitment to creating a safer world for future generations. The psychological recovery that Daniel had achieved through years of therapy and support demonstrated that even the most devastating betrayals could be overcome through persistence, professional help, and the support of authentic relationships based on trust and mutual respect. His willingness to share his story publicly had provided validation and inspiration for other victims, while also contributing to broader understanding of the long-term impact of sophisticated fraud on mental health and personal relationships. Richard Walker died in federal prison during his 8th year of incarceration, succumbing to complications from diabetes that had been exacerbated by the stress of imprisonment and his inability to access the lifestyle and medical care that had previously sustained him. His death eliminated any possibility of parole or reconciliation, while also providing Daniel with closure regarding the man who had systematically betrayed his trust and destroyed years of his life through calculated deception. Annika remained incarcerated, but had become a valuable resource for law enforcement agencies investigating similar fraud schemes, as her cooperation with authorities had led to the identification and prosecution of dozens of other criminals involved in international fraud networks. Her testimony in other cases demonstrated detailed knowledge of criminal techniques, while also providing insights into the psychological motivations that drove individuals to exploit personal relationships for financial gain. The international law enforcement cooperation that had been essential to solving Daniel's case continued to evolve and improve, with specialized units in multiple countries working together to combat sophisticated fraud schemes that crossed jurisdictional boundaries. The techniques and procedures developed through Daniel's investigation had become standard practices for investigating complex financial crimes, while also providing models for other agencies facing similar challenges. The insurance industry's reforms in response to Daniel's case had successfully prevented numerous similar fraud attempts, while also improving legitimate claim processing for grieving families who needed support during difficult times. The enhanced verification procedures and international cooperation agreements had made it significantly more difficult for criminals to exploit bureaucratic differences between countries to commit fraud. The legislative changes that had been prompted by Daniel's advocacy included enhanced penalties for fraud crimes involving family relationships, improved resources for victims seeking justice and recovery, and mandatory training for law enforcement officers investigating financial crimes. These changes had been adopted by multiple states and had contributed to more effective prosecution of sophisticated fraud, while also providing better support for victims. The academic research that Daniel's case had inspired contributed to enhanced understanding of sophisticated fraud techniques, while also advancing knowledge about effective prevention and treatment approaches. The interdisciplinary research involving criminology, psychology, and sociology provided valuable insights for both crime prevention and victim support, while also informing public policy responses to complex financial crimes. Emily Walker had become a nationally recognized expert in fraud, prosecution, and victim advocacy, with her legal expertise and personal understanding of family exploitation making her a valuable resource for other victims and law enforcement agencies. Her continued work on related cases demonstrated that individual tragedies could be transformed into expertise that protected other vulnerable individuals from similar exploitation. Detective Green's innovative investigation techniques had been adopted by law enforcement agencies worldwide, while his training programs had improved the quality of fraud investigations and provided better support for victims participating in criminal proceedings. His continued work on complex financial crimes demonstrated the importance of specialized expertise in combating sophisticated criminal networks that exploited personal relationships and cultural differences. 20 years after Daniel Walker first discovered that his supposedly dead wife was alive and living with his stepfather, the legacy of his case continues to protect vulnerable individuals from sophisticated fraud schemes, while demonstrating that even the most devastating betrayals can be transformed into forces for positive change through courage, persistence, and commitment to justice. The comprehensive response to his victimization, involving law enforcement, legal reform, victim advocacy, and public education, created systematic improvements that have prevented countless similar tragedies while providing support for other victims seeking justice and recovery. The Daniel Walker Foundation has become a permanent institution that provides direct support to fraud victims while also funding research and advocacy efforts that contribute to ongoing improvements in prevention and prosecution. The Foundation's work includes specialized counseling services for individuals exploited by family members and romantic partners, legal assistance for navigating complex recovery processes, and educational programs that help potential victims recognize and avoid sophisticated criminal schemes. Daniel and Sarah's family represents the possibility of building authentic relationships based on trust and mutual respect, despite previous experiences of devastating betrayal and manipulation. Their children, now young adults pursuing their own educational and career goals, have grown up with awareness of their father's experience, while also understanding the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation and supporting survivors of sophisticated crimes. The international law enforcement cooperation that was essential to solving Daniel's case has evolved into permanent frameworks for combating transnational fraud, while also providing models for other types of international criminal investigation. The specialized units and training programs developed in response to his case continue to identify and prosecute sophisticated criminal networks, while also providing better support for victims participating in complex legal proceedings. The legislative changes prompted by Daniel's advocacy have been adopted across multiple jurisdictions and have contributed to more effective prosecution of fraud crimes involving family relationships, while also providing enhanced resources for victims seeking justice and recovery. The legal precedents established through his case continue to influence prosecution strategies and victim support services, while also deterring potential criminals from attempting similar schemes. The insurance industry's reforms in response to Daniel's case have successfully prevented numerous fraud attempts, while also improving legitimate claim processing for grieving families who need support during difficult times. The enhanced verification procedures and international cooperation agreements continue to evolve in response to new criminal techniques, while maintaining the balance between fraud prevention and efficient service for legitimate claimants. The psychological research inspired by Daniel's case has contributed to enhanced understanding of the long-term impact of elaborate deception on victims' mental health, while also advancing knowledge about effective treatment approaches for individuals recovering from systematic manipulation and betrayal. The therapeutic techniques developed through this research continue to help other victims, while also contributing to broader understanding of trauma, recovery, and resilience. The public awareness created by Daniel's case and the media coverage it generated continue to provide education about sophisticated fraud techniques, while also reducing the stigma associated with victimization by trusted family members and romantic partners. The story's ongoing impact includes practical crime prevention benefits, while also providing validation and inspiration for other victims pursuing justice, despite significant personal and legal challenges. The corporate fraud prevention industry that emerged in response to Daniel's case and similar investigations continues to provide specialized services for protecting potential victims, while also making it more difficult for criminals to exploit personal relationships for financial gain. The industry's evolution demonstrates the market demand for protection services, while also providing practical solutions for individuals and families concerned about sophisticated fraud risks. The academic interest in Daniel's case continues to generate research across multiple disciplines, while also contributing to enhanced understanding of sophisticated criminal techniques and their impact on victims and society. The ongoing research provides valuable insights for crime prevention and victim support, while also informing public policy responses to complex financial crimes that exploit personal relationships and cultural differences. Emily Walker's career as a fraud prosecutor and victim advocate represents the transformation of personal tragedy into professional expertise that protects other vulnerable individuals from similar exploitation. Her continued work on related cases demonstrates the lasting impact that individual experiences can have on broader efforts to combat sophisticated crime, while also providing hope for other victims seeking to channel their experiences into meaningful social contribution. Detective Green's innovative investigation techniques and training programs continue to improve law enforcement responses to sophisticated fraud, while also providing models for other agencies facing similar challenges. His ongoing work demonstrates the importance of specialized expertise in combating complex criminal networks, while also highlighting the potential for individual cases to generate systematic improvements in criminal justice practices. The story of Daniel Walker serves as a permanent reminder that trust and vulnerability, while essential to meaningful human relationships, must be balanced with appropriate awareness of the sophisticated predators who exploit normal family bonds and romantic connections to facilitate devastating crimes. His journey from victim to advocate demonstrates that even the most elaborate betrayals can be overcome through courage, professional support, and commitment to protecting others from similar exploitation, ensuring that personal tragedy can be transformed into lasting positive change that benefits society as a whole.